Abridged version of the book, The Housemaid, by Freida McFadden. Introduction. Desperate after losing everything, Millie finds a job as a maid for the Winchesters, a wealthy family with an impeccable lifestyle. But behind the luxurious facade, the mansion hides disturbing secrets. From her tiny, oppressive attic room, Millie begins to sense the shadows of a lurking danger. Part 1. Closed Doors. Millie didn't have many options. After losing her job and becoming homeless, her old beat-up Nissan had become her refuge. So, in a moment of desperation, she answered the Winchester's ad, a wealthy family looking for a live-in housekeeper. On the day of the interview, the mansion dazzled her, an imposing structure with gleaming windows and meticulously manicured gardens. Nina Winchester, the lady of the house, was the embodiment of wealth and elegance, though a slight tremor in her hands and a nervous laugh hinted at something more. "Tell me about yourself, Millie," Nina said, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. Well, Millie hesitated, holding up her worn resume. "I grew up in Brooklyn. I've worked as a maid for other families, and I'm very good with kids." She looked around for signs of pets, and animals too. Nina smiled, her lips tight. "Brooklyn. We're practically neighbors. Isn't that wonderful?" Millie nodded, though she couldn't be further from Nina's privileged world. The woman's cream silk blouse and perfectly tailored skirt screamed luxury. In contrast, Millie had chosen second-hand clothes to look competent but not intimidating. As the interview progressed, Nina's enthusiasm grew. The position offered more money than Millie could dream of, plus room and board. When Nina mentioned that it was a job with housing included, Millie kept her composure, though it made her deeply relieved. "Yeah, I know," she said in a firm voice. "Great," Nina clapped her hands. "Let me show you the house." The tour was overwhelming. Marble floors, chandeliers, and a movie theater with tiered seating. But as they climbed the narrow, creaking staircase to the attic, Millie felt a chill. "This will be your room," Nina announced, pulling a cord to illuminate a dark, narrow space. The slanted ceiling barely allowed Millie to stand, and the only window looked out onto the empty backyard. "She's perfect," Millie lied, ignoring the uneasiness coiling in her stomach. Nina beamed. "I knew you'd love it." As they descended, a small, pale girl appeared in the hallway. "Mom," she said, her piercing blue eyes settling on Millie. "This is Cecilia," Nina introduced. "Cecilia, meet Millie. She'll help us." Cecilia didn't smile. "Nice to meet you," she said in a flat, hollow voice before disappearing into her room. Millie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, not just with the house, but with everyone who lived in it. She needed this job, though. Whatever the Winchesters' secrets were, they would have to wait. For now, she was safe, or so she thought. Part 2. Shadows in the Dark. Millie's new life as the Winchesters' maid seemed simple at first, cleaning, cooking, and occasionally caring for Cecilia, a quiet and disconcertingly polite 9-year-old. Yet there was something about the house that felt stifling, as if her every move was being watched. Her small, isolated attic room quickly became a source of discomfort. At night, strange creaking sounds echoed in the walls, and whispers seemed to drift in from above. The only window in her room, though barely large enough to look through, gave her a disturbing realization. No one could hear her scream from so far in the house. "You'll get used to it," Nina said when Millie mentioned the strange sounds. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Downstairs, Nana's behavior became increasingly erratic. One moment she was warm and welcoming, showing Millie how to arrange the precious china. The next she was exploding over an unwashed plate or a misplaced cushion. "Millie," Nana hissed one afternoon, her voice as sharp as a knife. "I told you the flowers should be fresh every day. What's this?" She thrust a wilted bouquet into Millie's hands. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Winchester," Millie stammered. "I'll fix it right away." "You'd better," Nina said, her eyes cold. Meanwhile, Cecilia's presence grew more unsettling. Millie caught her watching her from the hallway, her pale face half hidden behind the railing. When Millie smiled at her or gestured to her, Cecilia disappeared without a word. "Is she always like this?" Millie asked Nina during dinner preparations. How so? Nina replied in a dismissive tone. She's just shy. The only constant in the house was Andrew Winchester, Nina's husband. With his calm demeanor and easy charm, he was a welcome contrast to Nina's volatility. Andrew greeted Millie with a friendly smile and thanked her frequently for her work. I hope Nina isn't being too hard on you, he said one afternoon as he leaned against the kitchen counter. Millie hesitated. She has high standards. But I manage. Andrew nodded. Good. You're doing a great job. For a moment, Millie felt reassured. But when she turned to put away a plate, she saw Nina watching them from the doorway, her eyes burning with something Millie couldn't place. The more time Millie spent in the house, the more questions she had. Why did Nina seem so desperate to control every detail? Why was Cecilia always lurking in the shadows? And most disturbingly, why, when she went up to the attic one night to investigate the source of a strange noise, did she sense she was not alone? Standing in the darkness, Millie pressed her ear to the ceiling. For a moment, she heard nothing. Then, faintly, a sound. Soft, deliberate footsteps, echoing above her. Part 3. The Whisper in the Attic. The footsteps Millie heard from the attic above her bedroom weren't a figment of her imagination. Night after night, those sounds returned, each one measured and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth, just out of reach. One night, unable to bear the tension any longer, Millie grabbed her phone to use as a flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase leading to the attic door. The wood creaked beneath her feet, and each step amplified the knot of dread in her stomach. She reached the top and placed her hand on the cold brass doorknob. "Hello," she called, her voice shaking. No one answered. The silence was oppressive, enveloping her like a shroud. When she turned the doorknob, it didn't budge. Locked. The next day, Millie couldn't help but mention it to Nina. "Does anyone ever go into the attic?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Nina froze mid-sip of her coffee. For a brief moment, her mask of composure cracked, revealing something raw and fearful. "Why do you ask that?" she said, her voice tight. Millie shrugged. "I heard noises coming from up there. I thought there might be pests or something." Nina laughed, but the sound was hollow. "It's probably just the old house settling down." "There's nothing up there." But Millie wasn't convinced. Her suspicions deepened as she began to notice other strange things. The Winchesters' immaculate home wasn't so perfect upon closer inspection. A thin layer of dust covered the base of the attic stairs, undisturbed by anyone but her. One night, while putting away groceries, she found an unknown key hidden at the bottom of a drawer. Her instincts screamed at her to leave it be, but curiosity burned even stronger. That night, she waited until the house fell silent. Sliding toward the attic stairs, she inserted the key into the lock. She held her breath as the mechanism clicked. The attic was chilly, the air heavy with the smell of damp wood and mold. Her phone's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing haphazardly stacked boxes and furniture covered in white sheets. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary space, until her light landed on something out of place. In the far corner, a small bed stood against the wall, unmade. A few worn toys were scattered nearby. A teddy bear with one eye missing and a doll with frayed hair. The scene seemed frozen in time, intact but strangely alive. "What are you doing here?" Millie turned sharply, her heart leaping into her throat. Nina stood in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with something between fury and terror. I thought I heard something," Millie stammered, the lie weak even for herself. Nina stepped forward, her shadow lengthening across the attic floor. "You're not allowed in here," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. "Do you understand?" Millie nodded, backing toward the door. "Fine," Nina said, regaining her composure. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just leave it at that." As Millie descended the stairs, her mind seethed with questions. Whose bed was that? Why did it seem like Nina was hiding a ghost from her past? And most chillingly, why did the attic seem to be waiting for her to return? Part 4. Deceptive Appearances. Millie couldn't get the secrets of the attic out of her mind. The bed, the toys, and Nina's uncontrolled reaction were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't put together. Still, she had to proceed carefully. Nina's temper grew more volatile with each day, and Andrew, though kind, seemed too distracted to notice. One afternoon, as she was folding laundry in the living room, Cecilia silently appeared. The little girl watched her with those piercing blue eyes, as silent as a shadow. "Do you need anything, Cecilia?" Millie asked, forcing a smile. Cecilia tilted her head. "Did you see the attic?" Millie froze, dropping the shirt she was holding. "What do you mean?" Cecilia leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy says you shouldn't go there. But I can hear it too." Millie's pulse quickened. "Hear what?" "The crying," Cecilia replied simply, before turning and walking away, leaving Millie rooted to the spot. That night, Millie couldn't sleep. Cecilia's words echoed in her mind. At midnight, she made a decision. She quietly went downstairs to the kitchen, where Nina kept a bottle of wine. If she was going to find out the truth, she needed Nina to talk, and the best way to do that was through alcohol. "You couldn't sleep?" Nina asked as Millie brought the wine into the living room. Millie forced a laugh. "I thought we both deserved a break." Nina hesitated, but eventually agreed. As the wine flowed, her controlled facade began to crumble. "I don't expect you to understand," Nina said, staring into her glass. "This house, this family, it's not as perfect as it seems." Millie leaned forward. "You can tell me. I won't judge you." Nina's laugh was brittle. "You'd judge me if you knew. Everyone does. But they don't see what I have to endure, what he puts me through." Millie felt her heart race as she cautiously moved forward. "You mean Mr. Winchester?" Nina didn't answer. Instead, she stood abruptly, dropping her glass, which crashed to the floor. "Enough questions, Millie. Just do your job and stay out of my way." Millie watched her walk away, a mix of fear and determination hardening in her chest. The cracks in Nina's mask were growing wider, but the full truth remained elusive. The next morning, Andrew intercepted her in the hallway. "I saw you talking to Nina last night," he said, his voice low. "She looked like she needed someone to listen to her," Millie replied cautiously. Andrew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know things have been tense, but you shouldn't believe everything she says. Nina's been through a lot." "What do you mean?" Millie asked. Andrew hesitated, his eyes darkening. "Just remember, this house is full of appearances. They aren't always what they seem." Millie nodded, but Andrew's words only fueled her unease. Something was tearing this family apart, and the attic wasn't just a place, it was a warning. Whatever was hidden in its shadows was the heart of everything. Part 5. The Abyss. Millie's world quickly fell apart. Andrew's charm faded, revealing a man every bit as controlling and sadistic as Nina had implied. The attic room, once her refuge, became her prison. The door, which she always thought was locked from the inside, now sealed her fate from the outside. "Let me out," she screamed, banging on the heavy wood. Andrew's voice, calm and cool, filtered through the door. "This is for your own good, Millie. You need to learn." The days became a blur. He brought her meager meals, each encounter steeped in psychological torment. "Did you think you could replace Nina?" He sneered one night, setting down a bowl of cold soup. "You're nothing more than a plaything, easily discarded." Millie's spirit wavered, but a flicker of defiance remained. She spent hours examining the room, looking for anything that might help her escape. In one corner, under some loose floorboards, she discovered a small canister, pepper spray, probably hidden by a previous occupant. The next time Andrew came in, she was ready. When he approached, Millie used the spray directly in his eyes. "Damn you," she screamed, staggering back. Seizing the moment, Millie ran alongside him, fueled by adrenaline, racing down the stairs at top speed. She reached the front door, only to find it locked and no sign of the key. "Going somewhere?" Andrew's voice, despite the pain, echoed behind her. She turned to see him advancing, his eyes red and filled with fury. Desperation drove her on as she grabbed a decorative vase and threw it at him, buying precious seconds. She ran into the kitchen, opening drawers until her fingers found a knife. Andrew walked in, a predatory grin on his lips. "You think you can fight me? I won't be your victim," Millie spat, brandishing the blade. The struggle that followed was brutal. Andrew's strength overcame her, and the knife slipped from his hands. He pinned her to the cold tile floor, his hands tightening around her throat. "Last words," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. With the last of her strength, Millie brought her knee down on him in the groin. As he writhed in pain, she crawled towards the knife, gripping it with shaking hands. "Get away," she warned, her voice hoarse. But Andrew lunged at her, and instinct took over. The blade found its mark, sinking into his side. He gasped, his eyes wide in surprise, before collapsing. Millie stood over him, panting, as blood pooled on the ground at her feet. The nightmare was over, but the reality of what she had just done began to sink into her mind. Part 6. Deadly Truths. Millie staggered back, dropping the knife from her shaking hands. Andrew lay motionless on the ground, blood spreading in a dark pool around him. Her breathing was coming in ragged gasps, the rush of adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to give way to the ice of panic. What had she done? She didn't have much time to think. A sound coming from the stairs caught her attention. Slowly, like a ghost, Nina descended, her face pale but expressionless. Her gaze locked on Andrew's body, and for a moment, Millie thought she saw a flash of relief. "You killed him," Nina whispered, her voice eerily calm. "It was self-defense," Millie stammered. "He was going to." "I know," Nina cut in, taking a step closer. "I believe you. He was like that for so long. You did what I couldn't." The words hit Millie like a hammer blow. "You knew about all of this?" Nina nodded, tears filling her eyes. "He controlled everything. Me, Cecilia, even you. I wanted to leave, but he would have found us. There was no escape." She knelt beside Andrew's body, her shaking hand searching for his wrist. Confirming that he had no pulse, she stood, composed but fragile. "We need to call the police," Millie said, her voice firmer this time. "No." Nana's response was immediate. Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, no?" "He attacked me, Nina. They'll understand." Nina shook her head. "You don't understand how powerful he was. Even in death, his influence will crush us. If you call them, they'll twist everything. You'll be the villain, and Cecilia, and I will lose everything." Millie's mind was spinning. She wanted to trust Nina, but something felt off. The calmness in her voice, the way she seemed almost prepared for this. Nina acted quickly, gathering cleaning supplies. "We need to clean up. Fast. I'll help you, but we need to make it look like he's gone." Millie hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run, but the weight of the situation crushed her. If Nina was right, she could end up in prison, her life completely destroyed. As they worked to erase all traces of the struggle, Nana's behavior grew stranger. She hummed softly as she cleaned, her movements precise, almost rehearsed. When the house was spotless, Nina handed Millie a bag already packed. "You have to go. Take my car. There's money in the glove compartment. Drive away and don't look back." Millie took the bag, but uneasiness coiled in her stomach. "What about you and Cecilia?" Nina smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We'll be okay now. Thanks to you." The weight of her words hung heavy as Millie drove away from the mansion, the dark road devouring her. Questions swirled in her mind. Had she been manipulated, or was Nina truly a victim, finally freed from her torment? The answers lay behind her, in a house filled with secrets she might never fully understand. If you need me to translate the last part, let me know. Part 7. Echoes of Freedom. The further Millie drove from the Winchester mansion, the more surreal everything felt. The trees lining the road blurred into shadows as her mind relived the events of that night in jumbled fragments. Andrew's mocking look, Nana's eerie calm, Cecilia's cryptic warnings. It all mingled together in a chaotic storm. Hours later, she pulled into a motel, exhausted to the bone. The room was small, with peeling wallpaper, but it felt safer than any place she'd known in months. She dropped the bag Nina had given her on the bed and started to go through it. Then she stopped short. At the bottom, hidden beneath clothes and cash, was a folded note. "Millie, you've given Cecilia and me a second chance. I can't thank you enough for your strength. Don't look back. Don't contact us. Live your life. Nina." Millie read the words twice, then a third time, her unease growing. The tone was not one of gratitude, but of closure, like the final act of a play Millie didn't know she was taking part in. She couldn't sleep. The soft hum of the motel's air conditioning amplified her thoughts. Had Nina really been a victim? Or had she orchestrated the whole thing, using Millie as a weapon without knowing it? Morning came with no answers, only a resolution. She couldn't let the mystery consume her. With the money Nina had provided, she bought a used phone, careful not to leave a trace. She considered calling the police, but the risk was too great. Nina's words echoed in her mind. "Even in death, their influence will crush us." Instead, Millie chose a new destiny, a small town where no one knew her name, a place where she could rebuild her life. Yet even as she settled into a new routine, the shadows of the mansion remained. Occasionally, she found herself glancing over her shoulder, hoping to see Andrew's specter or Nina's icy smile. But they never appeared. The only ghosts were those in her mind, whose whispers faded with each passing day. Months later, she saw a news article online. Prominent businessman missing. Andrew Winchester's face stared back at her from the screen, his disappearance labeled a mystery. Nina and Cecilia were briefly mentioned, but it seemed they had vanished as well. Millie closed the article and turned off her phone. She had her answers now, though the world would never have them. In the stillness of her new home, she exhaled a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Freedom wasn't as clean as she had imagined, but it was hers now. The house, the family, the lies, they were all behind her. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake up to the faint sound of footsteps, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if they came from her dreams or from somewhere deeper. Get the full book at planetalibro.com.